who, go away and then the prodigal son return. So
Right.
there's something about needing to get a different perspective from the one you've become accustomed to. And it doesn't have to be a physical journey.
Although it could be a physical journey. I mean,
It could be a physical journey, but
yeah,
it's really that the images that we live by, that we have developed,
uh-huh.
are both an aid and a hindrance in this quest to find God.
Say more about that. How are they an aid and how are they a hindrance?
They're hidden because it takes a lot of awareness
Uh-huh.
to be able to get past the habituality of the way in which I respond to circumstances and the world around me.
Uh-huh.
And in none of those, and I've created those habits to make the world an easier place to deal with, even if it turns out that I've made it harder as a result of that.
Yeah, I think that you're on the right track
But
here,
it allows
Michael,
me to
because
live.
it turns out that we do need to have certain habits. You can't, be constantly in this state of euphoria or discovery and so on and so forth. You have to buy the groceries too. But at the same time, you can get so enmeshed in the punctilia of daily life that what is ultimately more valuable is obscured and it seems in some ways inaccessible. If you think about trying to find love, let's say, um, you're married to the same person. How long, Judith? 64
We've been
years?
married 60 years, but we met when we were freshmen and we didn't get married till we graduated.
Okay, so we can count that as 60 or 64,
4
right?
years.
Yeah, so I don't presume, but if any of us have these kinds of relationships, it's not euphoria every moment of every day.
Amen.
And sometimes it even can be difficult, but it's often just neutral. You have to, go do the shopping. You have to go to the post office. You have to deal with people who are vendors, and you don't really have a relationship with them, but they provide a service. Those are not bad things, but they can obscure what is more, certainly spiritually or morally uplifting. You have to get these things done, and yet at the same time, you have to allow enough open space so that other things can occur. That it's a kind of delicate balancing act. And I remember the song, "Back in Your Own Backyard." Does anybody know that song?
Yeah.
No.
All right. Something or other in Spain, through your window pane, back in your own backyard. Oh, you can go to the east, go to the west. Someday you'll fall. Weary at heart, back when you started from. That is part of the message here. We have to somehow leave ourselves, get distance on ourselves before we find out what is the unique treasure that we already possess. That's a difficult thing to do because day-to-day life conspires to fill up your time and your energy with things that distract you from that kind of process. So I don't know if I have any special wisdom about how to balance those things. I just know that constantly, at least in my own life and lives of people that I know, there is continuing adjustment between doing what you have to do and doing what you find fulfilling. Sometimes there's an overlap, and sometimes not. I have this little factoid I'd like to share with people. During the Apollo mission, to the moon, what percentage of the time do you think the moon capsule, the hollow capsule, was on course?
0.
Well, that's not. Then who knows where it landed? It eventually got there. It has to at least be 1%, right?
Well, but they didn't get to where they thought they were going to get.
1,000 adjustments or something like that.
Well, there are many, many adjustments, and what I had heard, I don't know if this is accurate, that it was actually on course about 5% of the time. Although it was included the crucial percent because it did land on the moon.
The problem was,
Most of the time was taken up in course correction.
yeah, part of the reason, Michael probably knows more about this, but that the computers then didn't go to enough decimal places.
Oh, is that the problem?
Yeah, does that sound right, Michael?
Well, I don't think that's quite right. I think it's that, and I think what Rabbi is referring to is that we start going in a particular direction, and if we know or we have some sense of where we're going to go, we make a course correction, and
Right.
then we correct by some amount, and then we have to correct again. I mean, if you actually watch yourself drive a car on the highway, you never go in a completely straight line. There's always little adjustments. Sometimes I drive and I can feel my arms moving gently back and forth as it makes little tiny adjustments.
Well, partly this has to do with the fact that it's very difficult to course correct and wind up on exactly the right spot. We overcorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we are constantly moving back and forth. This has great application to the question of growth and self-improvement. You know, if you are asking the question, what does it look like when we learn or when we grow or when we develop? It doesn't happen that we're on a straight line, and each time we make a little bit of a step in the right direction, we find that it's in part not accurate. In part, it is an overcorrection. So in the end, I think what this story is getting at is that there is virtue in the attempt to correct, to change things so that you are on course, even though that means that as a percentage of the time, you're not on course most of the time. If you were to look at your own life and your own development, you will probably find, most of us would probably find, that we are where we want to be, or we are on track, not nearly as often as we would like to be. But that's the way it is. Yeah, Win.
But one of my favorite parts about the story, I think, is that he's not doing it himself. He goes on his quest, and then he just stands there. He can't do anything because it's daylight. He can't pick up the treasure, and he's just kind of stuck. And then he gets, like, I don't know if you want to call it a spirit guide or whatever. He gets someone who helps him, and which brings up 2 points: is sometimes that you need help to figure all this stuff out, and the other one was, how do you know if you're talking to the right helper or not?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
And that's part of the course correction itself. We talk to people, we get advice, and we get information and so on and so forth, but sometimes itself is not accurate, or it causes a delay or a challenge, or it entails some misdirection. And in this case, what is the nature of the advice or the help, so-called, that the person gets from the policeman? What does the policeman say?
Well, I think you have to step away from a situation in order to see it clearly.
Yes, I think that's a big part of it. But when you step away, you can also be redirected by the people or situations that one encounters. but the redirection may not always be actually on target. What does the policeman suggest? First of all, he dismisses the whole project. Yeah, you Jews are always in pursuit of a dream, crazy people that you are. And how is that helpful to the traveler? The policeman says, well, you know, it's funny. I had a dream, and in my dream, there was this guy, the same name as you, who lives in your town, and he already had a treasure. How did he get that information?
He says
Well,
it's a dream.
Sorry,
there-
Stephanie?
He said it was a dream after criticizing this guy's dream.
Yeah, there's a whole series of stories like this. In fact, not Proust. The Jewish writer whose name is escaping me at the moment. Wrote The Cockroach.
Kafka.
Sorry?
Kafka.
Kafka, right. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, he's got a story along these lines as well, which he may have taken from Nachman. Why do you need, of what purpose, what value is this kind of information that simply sends you back to where you were? Well, is it exactly that you're going back in the same state as you were when you left?
Nope.
No.
Why is it different?
There's this kind of scheme that William Blake talked about where you go from innocence to experience to
Right.
innocence.
Yes. What would that,
You
how
go,
would that apply practically in terms of personal change or growth, Kim?
well, you have to go through some shit in order to get where you want to go.
Yeah.
And then you
So-
kind of shower and you wash it off, but you're different.
Yeah. So you're different because of the experience of what? Of lost, of being lost, or of being your pathway being disrupted. Somehow these things have value in and of themselves, even though they are not being on the track.
And this is what kids have. They don't have that experience.
So just bringing this directly here,
Uh-huh.
we've all come because we wanted to learn something
Right.
about our relationship to God and our relationship to our own treasures. We don't keep going in this group of 6. We finish the class
Yes.
and then we go off into the lives that we were participating in before this
Right.
with a different piece of information about who we are and what our relationship is to the people around us.
Well, partly that's because of, as I think it was Judith who said, gaining a different or better or more accurate perspective. But getting that perspective entails something, a sense of loss. You have to be distant in order to get the perspective. And distance can be felt as pain or absence or all sorts of things that are not necessarily in and of themselves all that pleasant. Somehow, though, they can contribute to our awareness. So what I'm suggesting is that in the going on the quest for what he wants for the treasure, the first step that the man takes is to leave what is familiar, what he understands, what he knows, in and finding in that loss
Mm.
exactly what he's looking for. I've always loved irony, and this is a great example of irony. In losing yourself or losing your connection to familiar things, you find yourself. In becoming distant, you become closer. These kinds of ironies are part of this story, and they're part of this process of learning or of development or of growth, whatever term you want to use. You have to lose yourself, lose what you're actually looking for in order to find it. I just
Also, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
He goes to his cellar and digs up his cellar. Well, what is the cellar? The cellar is our foundation.
Uh-huh.
And so we have to examine the foundation of what we've built this rest of the structure on that we call our lives or our personalities or whatever. And we have to dig into that because in there is the treasure.
Yeah, and you might even go so far, I think, Michael, as to say that it's in the act of leaving and it's in the act of digging that you find something. Mm-hmm. Okay? I mean, if you think about it in terms of our own personalities, can you give me examples of what digging might be?
Well, digging.
Therapy.
It could be therapy. Yes, I think that's a very helpful answer. It could be therapy. That's to a substantial degree what therapy is about. It's digging underneath things and finding stuff that is otherwise obscured. And what you discover, some kind of insight, is of great value. It's a treasure. But it's not the end of the process, is it? What else do you have to do once you have dug in your cellar and you have found the treasure? What do you have to do?
Go spend it.
Okay, what does that mean? I like that, but you're gonna have to flesh that out a little bit.
I was just being frivolous, but
Well, maybe so. I think it actually has the kind that really has some value. What is a treasure? What is a treasure useful for? What do you do when you find a treasure?
I think sharing it.
Yeah, it becomes
Process.
something that you then use in order to have a certain effect. If the treasure remains unused, then you might as well not have dug it up. What's the point?
Well, you have to accept it first too.
Yes.
You have to accept that this is my treasure and I accept it as opposed to shutting the box and walking away.
That's right. And if we're talking about a treasure, imagine opening a treasure chest, like some pirate. Arr, you find your treasure chest. What's inside?
pieces of 8.
Could be pieces of 8. It could be jewelry or whatever. There's some kind of very valuable something inside the chest.
It could be, at least this is something that has been important to me.
Yeah.
It could be the ability to show up for other people.
Okay. Tell me more about that. What does that mean?
To be able to be present with them without the baggage that was my previous foundation.
Okay. So just finding the treasure chest, let's say, is not enough. You have to open that up and see what's inside. So the treasure is what's inside the treasure chest. So you dig up the treasure chest and you're not done with the process. You still have to open it and look inside and see what there is. So, the process of discovery or of growth is not, there is still an external entity which obscures the actual treasure. You have to move beyond what is the the encapsulating form that keeps the treasure itself actually hidden. And we can push it a little bit further. Let's say you open up the treasure chest. You find the treasure chest. What do you have to do to open it up?
Unlock it.
A lock, a key.
There's a lock. You need a key to open the lock, or you need to get a hammer and break the lock, or whatever. The treasure is not just there easily acceptable. You have to do something to open the chest, which is otherwise locked, and the chest prevents you from actually having access to the treasure itself. And then let's say you do find the lock for the treasure chest, and you're able to unlock the treasure chest. Now you've got pearls or diamonds or rubies or pieces of 8 or whatever it is. What do you have to do then?
Take a good chunk out of the piece of 8 to make sure it's real.
There you go. That's where the R comes in, you know. Right. In the olden days, the metal for coins, if you're talking about gold or whatever, it's actually pretty soft, and you can tell whether or not it's actually really valuable, precious metal. So yeah, you have to test it. You have to look at it carefully and see, is it really treasure? Just because it's in the treasure chest doesn't necessarily mean that it is treasure.
Well,
You know?
also,
Yeah.
I'm remembering going and opening what I thought was a treasure chest, so to speak, and was moldy old clothes inside.
It could be.
And that your treasure might not be sparkly diamonds, and you open it and you see the moldy old clothes, but that's when you start the next process of understanding what that is and how that is how that's valuable and how that's part of you and your, I don't know, there's more there than just the glittery stuff, and that the next phase involves almost as much understanding and work as the therapy to get you there.
I think that's a very, very good point, Ben. It's like those Russian nesting dolls. There's always something inside. You open up one, and there's another one inside. So eventually, you get, at least with nesting dolls, you get to the tiniest doll. But I think in this process, that's not necessarily what you go through. You are constantly looking inside things to find what are the contents of this treasure. And it leads me, at least, to conclude that it's the process of unlocking the treasure chest and all the things that are inside it, one thing after another, after another, after another, which is in fact the process of growth or discovery. That is what is valuable. It's not that you at some point you have unearthed the treasure and now it's a static process. There's always another level of treasure inside. So we look at these things as a kind of the opposite of an infinite regression, an infinite progression, I guess you might say. And we might say, okay, I've gotten to this state, but I could go one step further. Although, practically speaking, we're human beings, we get tired. You know, it's hard to keep that kind of work up continually, day in and day out, hour after hour after hour. At some points, we have to stop and rest. So there is the tug of this, the attraction of discovery, but there's also the necessity to leave the process alone from time to time. You cannot do it continually. Yeah, Judith.
I think we need to stop and rest so we can integrate. I'm thinking of this treasure as classes. And
Okay.
we need a summer vacation or a holiday vacation so it can we can process it.
Yeah. So even when we absent ourselves from the process, the active process of discovery, there's value in that. If it's in the service of this larger process, the rest or the withdrawal can have some value. Michael, I saw your hand.
Yeah. So I think that when a piece gets uncovered,
Uh,
there's a great tendency to become weary
yes,
and have the old mechanisms come back because it's not yet sustainable. It takes some work to have it be sustainable. And I was just thinking about the fact that in classic Judaism, whatever that is, there's prayer 3 times a day.
yes, sir.
And so if each time you pray,
Mhm.
it becomes a reminder to go after the stuff, then it becomes a reminder, oh, I'm going to try to do something about this now. And then I'll go away and do whatever my morning chores are. And then I'll come
Sure.
back at midday and I'll do it again. And I think there's great value in having that regularity of this kind of practice, whichever kind you end up deciding on.
You know, there's a lot of wisdom in that, Michael. And this is embedded in Judaism in a lot of different ways, on a lot of different levels. How often do you read the Torah?
The actual Torah or
Yeah.
the Hebrew Bible?
Well, all right, Hebrew scriptures or whatever. We do that every week, right?
Yeah. Well, 3 times a week, 3 times a week.
That's
For-
right. And after having done that and gone through that whole process, so are we done?
No, we do it again.
We do it again.
We're just restarting Breshit again. It's, you know.
That's right. Because in each one of these levels, there is more there to discover. It's the nesting dolls again. It's the treasure within the treasure chest, and so on and so forth. And at each point, we might unlock things, but that doesn't mean that that's the last lock. There's more to uncover. There's more to discover. And we are constantly involved in that repetitious structure. You cannot get away from the idea that there is no point at which this process of discovery ends. We've come to the end of the line. There's nothing else to discover, nothing else to know. One of my favorite examples of this, in the end of the 19th century, there are 2 very well-known physicists named Michelson and Morley. Anybody familiar with these guys?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah. So what are they best known for? You know,
Fighting.
Sorry?
Fighting with each other.
Well, they did fight with each other. They fought. They also
Didn't they
but
discover
at some point-
magnetism or the electron? One of those things.
Well, no, with electrons, the structure of the atom and so forth. I mean, I'm no technical savant here. However, they are well known for having said, well, physics has gone as far as it can go. We have discovered everything there is to know, and there is no point in continuing the process of the investigation of the universe through physics because there isn't anything else to discover. Can you imagine? You know, and these were not crackpots. These were people who were well-respected physicists.
So I have to tell you a little anecdote, if I may.
Sure, of course.
So I remember I was in psychotherapy for a number of years, and periodically I would finish a session and come out, and I would say, "I have discovered the ultimate answer to everything."
Okay. That's right.
Then, of
And
course,
how many times did that occur, Michael?
numerous.
Of course.
A Russian doll's worth.
Yeah, I think that's important to bear in mind, and it can be a frustrating part of the experience because you work at it, you nudge it, you prod it, you poke it, and you come up with some valuable gem,
Yeah.
and then you realize, but that's not everything. It's like that old song by Peggy Lee. Is that all there is? And of course, the answer is no. That's not all there is. A, because there's always more to discover, and B, because things change, including you yourself, as well as the world around you, and so on and so forth. So the very structure of our experience requires us be involved in an ongoing and unending process of discovery. And what's the cost if we somehow don't get back into that after having gotten weary or whatever it is? We're ready to take a rest, whatever. What happens if we don't get back into it?
You sink back to where you were.
No.
Well, you say no. Tell me why you say no.
Judith, was that you? That
Oh,
said
I
no?
thought it was you, Michael.
Oh, I didn't say no.
Who said
Oh,
no?
well, I think you may settle, but you don't go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
Okay. All right,
You
that's
sort
fine.
of fall back to an
Fall back
earlier
to the
state.
Yeah.
You know, and so now you have to overcome the inertia
Mhm.
that you have, which has become apparent because you've stopped the process of moving forward. You know, there's I may have used this example before. There's one of two Pulitzer Prize winning physicists at UT, the fellow named Ilya Prigozhin. Anybody familiar with this guy?
No.
Very, very interesting fellow. He has this idea that in dealing initially with the structure of the atom, the electrons, and all the different kinds of pentalach that are part of the atom, it has a certain structure, and what happens is that it absorbs energy just from the world around it. And when it does, it absorbs the energy, gets more and more excited, so to speak. And at a certain point, either the structure of the atom has to shift so it can continue to absorb the energy that it surrounds it, or it has to give off the energy and drop down to a lower energy state. Now, Prigozhin says that this is not just about particles in an atom. This is the way the universe operates. You know, so at a certain point, we all get a chance to decide if we're willing to change, or if we experience a change, which allows us to continue to grow, to absorb energy, and so on and so forth, or we can refuse to do that, and then we have lost at least some part of what we have learned, what we have gained, or the changes we've encountered, and the process has to start over again. His idea, as I understand it, and I'm sure it's more complicated than what I understand, but this is what I'm aware of. He maintains that this happens in any structure, social organizations, political parties, all sorts of institutions. They all absorb energy from the field around it and either have to reconfigure themselves or drop back to a lower energy level. To me, this is a brilliant idea because what it explains is how it is that there is at least on the level of human activity, there is a decision in this process. At a certain point, we either are willing we are willing to be open to change, or we resist it. This, some people would call this failure of nerve. At a certain point, we are faced with a dilemma. Are we willing to continue to change in order to absorb what is new and what there is to learn around us, or are we going to ignore it? And I think that Prigozhin's point is that most people, most of the time, or most institutions for that matter, most of the time, are willing to drop down to the lower energy level and give up whatever growth or change they have encountered, because it is just easier to do. It is less uncomfortable.
So unfortunately, that explains a lot of Trump's popularity.
I agree. We're in a period of time now of great cataclysmic change in all sorts of areas: gender identity, economics, you name it. And many people, I don't know what the percentage is, but many people, if not most people, are comfortable with ignoring these new sources of energy, these impulses to change, because they're more comfortable with the way things have been.
Yeah. Or at least the way they thought they would have been.
Oh, yes, that's
There's
true.
a certain amount of imagination that takes place there as well, which is part of the re-encapsulating
Yeah.
into an older mode of behavior.
Yeah, it's not just about comfort. Although it is, I think, substantially about comfort. It's also about our ability to our ability to welcome change, our ability to stretch ourselves. You know, it's not just that we appreciate the way things were, but to change requires causes a certain level of discomfort.
So it seems to me, it's interesting. It feels to me like we have been for a long time in a state of accelerating change.
Yes.
And it's almost like there's an evolutionary process going on where those of us who are comfortable with faster paced change are going to survive in the long term, whereas those who don't will be dropped by the wayside.
I think it's sad, but I agree with you, Michael, that is an inevitable. Those are inevitable outcomes to this process.
And isn't that also true of, to use the words of the Torah that we're using here, in our quest for God, that as we move forward, we find ourselves in a field of accelerating change.
Yes. Well, and let's talk a little bit about what this notion of accelerating change is. I mean, there's a kind of dynamism that is a part of, which is basic to all change. You're not in a position, if you're truly changing, if you're truly growing, to moderate or slow down the change.
Mm-hmm.
To be open to change means that you are giving up control of change to a certain degree. It is something that has its own integrity. So it may be the case that you would rather things change more slowly. But what you really are not in a position to do is to hold up that rate of change. Because once you get involved in change, the changes themselves dictate the pace. Yeah, Win.
I was just thinking about getting on a roller coaster, and you get on the roller coaster and it's going to go no matter what. You can be the person who's there going, oh my God, stop it, oh my God. Or you can be the person that just goes, wee. Or you can be the person somewhere in the middle that does a little bit of both. And
lots of ways along the way, yeah.
Yeah, but you're not going, the roller coaster is going to go no matter what.
That's true. Yeah, that's why they tell you to keep your hands inside the car at all times. Okay, because you might say, oh, I'm going to put my arm up, and you think, all right, no problem, I'll get it down in time. Well, maybe you can't. You know, this is what we call in physics, and I'm kind of out of my depth here, but I'll throw the term out, is kinetic energy, which I think that Prigozhin and the discussion we're having on the basis of his ideas is that these dimensions of the physical universe are not just about the physical universe. They apply to any kind of complex entity which has a certain organization, and that organization is not static. It is affected by the world in which it exists, and it has to change, or it can become, kind of a fossil, which is I think what we find a lot in our politics these days, there are a lot of fossils who are uncomfortable being anything but a fossil. They would rather be encased in amber or in sandstone, like fossils are, even though there is, I'm sure, although many people may not always act this way, I think that these folks have a sense that there is something else lurking out there, and maybe they're afraid of it, or maybe it makes them uncomfortable, but it's not as if they are hermetically sealed from change. It's a decision to reject it. But if you're making a decision to reject, then you are aware of something else. Rejection only makes sense, or absence only makes sense if you're moving away from something that you are aware of. Am I being clear? Yeah? No? So, you can talk to some of these far right-wing, all right, I'm going to reveal myself, far right-wing, evangelical sorts. They know that out there that there are things that are contradicting their little system. They're aware of it.
Mhm.
They ignore it. They reject it. They try to live a life that is unaffected by it. But what they can't do is erase it. I think this is important to bear in mind because it has an impact on how we approach the notion of community. Even though some people are willing to reject what is new or new sources of energy or whatever, it's important to remember that on some level, they are aware of the change that's going on around them. And the key is to understand how to communicate in a way that people are able to see the energy or the change without feeling threatened, without feeling that they are under attack, or that there is nothing of value in their standard or conventional way of viewing things. It's not easy to do, believe me. I've been involved in this kind of activity one way or another for more than 40 years as a rabbi, and I'm here to tell you, if you haven't already experienced it yourself, which you probably have, the idea that there is no possibility of talking to people or interacting with people or interacting with institutions, that is a mistake. But you have to be very clear about what's the level that you do it on, how to do it, how to insert yourself into the process. Not so easy to do. So we're at 12:58. I think we've reached a good point to stop for today. We'll do it. I had hoped ridiculously that we would get to a second story today. This is part of the idea of hope and change. But I'll pick out another story for next time. And you have the text. I hope you already do. But there's no reason that if you're looking, there's a lot of the stories are short. You look for bathroom reading, whatever. You can. There are a lot of stories here that are worth taking a look at. So take a few minutes to read over any of these stories you find intriguing, and we'll figure out another one for next week.
Right.
Everybody okay?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure entirely. Good to see you. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom. Wait, Kim?
Yeah. Until, so we have a treasure, but until we experience kind of that teaching or whatever it is in our life, it doesn't really make an impact. For example, do unto others as you do unto you. So you learn that great wisdom, but until you actually engage in a situation where.
Well, I think that's true, but that's sort of the point about how this is a dynamic process. Just understanding the idea is not enough. You have to enact the idea. You have to engage with the idea. It's not about just being aware of it intellectually. It's about experiencing it.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
you.